7 Republican presidential candidates face off in the second primary debate of the 2024 campaign. Plus, the United States barrels towards a government shutdown with no agreement in sight. Hello, I'm Eleanor Clift, and this is The Heat. The U.S. government is heading for a shutdown on September 30th. Tensions erupted as House Republicans met behind closed doors on Thursday, the latest sign of deep divisions within their own party. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, 7 of the Republican candidates for president, minus frontrunner Donald Trump, sparred in their second presidential debate. CGTN's Edith Tiansen has more in this report.
Candidates get
Republican presidential hopefuls clashed over a number of issues in a chaotic debate on Wednesday night, many taking a tough stance when it comes to immigration.
Donald Trump failed on this as well. He said he was going to build a wall across the whole border. He built 52 miles of wall and said Mexico would pay for it. Guess what? I think if Mexico knew that he was only going to build 52 miles, they might have paid for the 52 miles.
Thank you, Governor.
Candidates took aim at each other, often talking over one another while asserting their positions on Trump-era policies.
What you don't need is a president who is against energy independence. Ron DeSantis is against fracking. He's against drilling. He's been against. You did it. He always talks about what happens on day one. You better watch out, because what happens on day two is when you're in trouble. Day two in Florida, you banned fracking. You banned offshore drilling. You did it on federal lands, and you took green subsidies that you didn't have to take.
Governor DeSantis, you were mentioned. You have the right to respond.
Praised for her performance in the first debate, Haley also received much attention for her attacks in this round. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is still far behind Donald Trump by some 43 percentage points, according to some recent polls.
And you know who else is missing in action? Donald Trump is missing in action. He should be on this stage tonight. He owes it to you to defend his record, where they added $7.8 trillion to the debt. That set the stage for the inflation that we have.
Shunning the presidential debate, former U.S. President Donald Trump spoke at a rally in Detroit, Michigan, where auto workers have been on a strike. But instead of labor issues, his message focused on electric vehicles and their impact on the auto industry.
Now they want to go all electric and put you all out of business. You know that, right? We love being with you, and we love being with you right in your environment. You built this country, you love this country, and you are the ones that make our country run. You know that, right?
The Republican presidential debate ended without any candidate securing a breakthrough moment, with former President Trump still comfortably leading in the primary contest, despite his 4 criminal indictments. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Simi Valley, California.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Brittany Lee Lewis is a political analyst and Ph.D. candidate at George Washington University. Atiba Madyun is the founder and president of Party Politics US. Also with us is Adolfo Franco. He's an attorney and Republican strategist. And Eleanor Clift is a political columnist with The Daily Beast. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Eleanor, let's start with you. As we just saw, 7 Republican presidential candidates on the stage there taking part in that debate. Of course, the leading candidate, Donald Trump, was not there. And this is what one of the candidates on the stage, Chris Christie, had to say about that. Let's watch.
And Donald Trump should be here to answer for that, but he's not. And I want to look in that camera right now and tell you, Donald, I know you're watching. You can't help yourself. I know you're watching, okay? And you're not here tonight, not because of polls and not because of your indictments. You're not here tonight because you're afraid of being on the stage and defending your record.
So, Eleanor, Trump is leading in the polls for the Republican nomination. In fact, he's more than 40 points ahead from his nearest rival. Why wasn't he on stage? And, I mean, what's the point of these debates if the leading candidate is not there to be scrutinized?
Well, he's more than 40 points ahead of his nearest competitor in nationwide polls among Republicans. But the primary contest is state by state. And Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is still in contention in Iowa, and so is Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina. And New Hampshire, while Trump is ahead in the polls in both Iowa and New Hampshire, there is the possibility that he could be upset in elections, primary elections that don't take place until, January of next year. Trump is running as though he's an incumbent president and doesn't have to bother with the primary process. And it makes sense because the debates so far have looked kind of like the kids' table. And in fact, Trump himself mocked the debate last night, saying to the audience, "Did you see a vice president in that group? I didn't see one." And that's the conventional wisdom, is that these 7 candidates, one of them is a likely vice presidential pick for Donald Trump. And so they don't seem in contention to be president. And so I think it's a very awkward situation for the Republican National Committee to be holding these debates and having them not being treated seriously. And the candidates are attacking each other more than they are attacking the front runner. So it looks right now like Trump is headed towards a comfortable victory for the Republican nomination.
Adolfo, great to have you with us in the studio. Lots of shouting, as we just heard our reporter tell us. There was some, I think it'd be fair to say, there were some token attempts at attacking Donald Trump, but nothing serious, no knockout blow there. What did you make of it?
Well, first of all, I agree with the report that it was chaotic in every regard, which is unfortunate. I think the clips you've shown were basically it. There were actually very few. Most of the infighting was among the candidates. So I thought it was chaotic. I'm reminded, you mentioned there are 7, of course. They looked like the 7 dwarfs compared to President Trump. But you have to say that. I agree with Eleanor in this regard. He is, in many ways, the incumbent president. He was the former president of the United States. He's not the sitting president, but he's the former president. I think he would be diminished if he were in these debates, and he has nothing to gain from these debates. Every single poll, every week that comes out, his lead grows. Eleanor's right. His lead is 46% on the national polls over his closest contender, which is now Governor DeSantis. However, even in Iowa and in New Hampshire, he is well ahead by double digits, not 46%, but 25% ahead. That is a huge, almost insurmountable lead. So to have Donald Trump on this stage only does 2 things. Benefits the other candidates, for certain. They will shift the attention all to President Trump, who would be on the defensive. Yeah. And secondly, he would be diminished. There's something President Reagan did. I came here in the Reagan administration. He didn't debate in Iowa in 1980. He had a pretty good strategy. He ultimately did. But he didn't debate while he was ahead, only if he needed to. Donald Trump will debate if the numbers change. Unless that changes, Donald Trump is not debating.
But very quickly, Adolfo, as Eleanor pointed out, into the poll that we're talking about, the 46 points, that's a national poll.
Correct.
If the state-by-state races are in contention, isn't that reason enough to be in these debates?
I don't think so. I think it's too early to tell that. Again, even in Iowa, let's take Iowa, which is the first in the country, a caucus. In Iowa, he is ahead by a very, very large margin. Yeah. President Reagan did not debate in Iowa in 1980. He was also very similar to President Trump. He had been the Republican contender, not the nominee, but almost won the nomination in '76. He lost Iowa to George Bush and then debated in New Hampshire. If that were to happen here, for example, there would be an upset in Iowa, then President Trump will engage. If he doesn't have to, he won't, and he frankly shouldn't.
Atiba, we've been hearing words like chaotic, messy when talking about this debate. In fact, many of the candidates were talking over each other during the debate, talking over the moderators as well. But did you see any kind of breakout moment?
No, there was no breakout moment. And I agree with both Eleanor and with Adolfo. There's no breakout moment. And what the candidates are doing, they're beating each other up. On the stage, it would appear to me that they should be attacking Trump's record. They should attack and talk about the things that he did not do. DeSantis tried to lean into that when he talked about inflation and he talked about the debt. But aside from that, it is chaotic. It's like watching the Three Stooges when I was a kid on a Saturday afternoon. It's a mockery. And the shameful part about this is that if this is the direction of the Republican Party has a big issue to address. I know that later on we're probably going to talk about the government shutdown, but All of these things are gridlock and everything that we keep seeing in Washington. And we see the president, the former president, with some of these legal woes that he has faced with him. This is a bad reflection of the country. It's a bad reflection of where in the direction of the country. And them on the stage have a great opportunity to really paint a vision of hope and a vision for the future for how they see the country. Instead, they're just really painting the picture of what is really happening, and that is a lot of chaos and political gridlock.
Brittany, great to have you with us. It doesn't appear that former President Donald Trump is paying any kind of political price for skipping these debates. His poll numbers actually went up, and it doesn't seem like the indictments are hurting him in the polls either. So what does this tell us about the country?
Yeah, I recently saw a survey that said that voters have actually become more likely to believe that the GOP cares about them, that Trump cares about them specifically, and I see that sort of a remnant from before. Trump has this sort of populist following that continues to take shape. He has complete control of the Republican Party, which is why I see that, most of the candidates not only said that they will support him, but they know essentially that they have to, right? I think at best they're just really vying for that vice president role and other appointments, under Donald Trump. So, I think it just goes to show you at the end of the day that Donald Trump and Trumpism is here to stay, if you will.
Yeah.
But, he has the support of his base. That seems to be unshakable. But, as we are aware, in many of these national elections or the presidential election, it's independents that decide who will go to the White House.
Yeah, I think it's undeniable how important independents are going to be. And I think that, this is going to be really difficult moving forward because we know Biden, at the end of the day, he's going to be it's going to be very difficult for Biden to beat Trump head on. And we know that Trump is actually going to clinch the position ultimately. So, it's tough. It's tough.
Eleanor, let's look at the Democrats for a moment. There are increasing questions over President Biden's ability, both mentally and physically, whether they have any merits or not, to run again. There's an overwhelming number of Democrats who say, look, we'd like to see another candidate, not Joe Biden. Add to that the House investigation now into influence peddling schemes by his son. I mean, what are the options for the Democrats right now?
The options for the Democrats is to line up behind Joe Biden, which they're doing. There's a big Democratic bench, Vice President Kamala Harris for one, the California governor, the Michigan governor, Illinois governor. There's a bench there, and I think it's interesting that the California governor Newsom is going to be debating the Florida Governor DeSantis on November 30. They're both the stand-ins for the likely nominees of their party. But Democrats, I think, are going to move past the kind of wringing the hands phase, how they want a younger, more vigorous president, and begin to really focus on the accomplishments that Biden has achieved, more than anyone really since FDR in the last century. He wants a third term. He deserves a third term. There is a mechanism in place should he become incapacitated. It's called the vice president. And there, as I mentioned, there's a bench out there. And all those, the Democrats who are worried about his age, ask them a second question. If he runs, will you support him? And the answer is yes. But this is going to be a competitive election. And this week alone, you had the former president addressing striking union workers in Michigan, Democrats, or formerly Democrats, and they're in contention because of climate policies, and Trump is going to try to convince them if they stick with Biden, all their jobs are going to go to China. So Trump is a populist. He's a different kind of Republican. He has kind of an animal instinct as to where to go to find the votes. It's a competitive election. It's probably going to be decided in 4 or 5 states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which are the 3 states Trump won in 2016 and Biden won in 2020. So it's a close election. It's going to be decided by tens of thousands of people from a handful of states that you could put in one football stadium. So there's a lot at stake. And very few people are going to make the ultimate decision, and they're mainly independents, and Trump has not done well among independents. If he chooses a vice president wisely, that could help. And there are so many more steps to go through in this process, but we do know we have a very competitive election. Trump has a path to the presidency. Democrats can't take anything for granted.
Adolfo, just getting your view on this, you know, if it's a head-to-head, Trump against Biden, that's the second round. We have seen polling where, you know, voters say, look, the Democrats need to get another candidate. We don't like the candidate that's there right now. But if it's Trump versus Biden, we're going to vote for Biden.
I don't think we're taking into account the enthusiasm factor that will be gone for Joe Biden. He's an incumbent. I take exception with the analysis Eleanor just made. He's passed more legislation than anybody since FDR. Bad legislation. Most people see Bidenomics as a failure. Just pumped your gasoline in the United States or groceries, they don't see recovery. Infrastructure, this radical climate agenda appeals to coastal elites, but President Trump's absolutely right. It doesn't appeal to union workers in Michigan. And that message you saw from President Trump was the right message. Really? Don't worry about this strike. You could be losing your jobs because of the agenda of the extreme left. So you can pass extremist leftist agenda. It's just out of sync with I think, with the majority of American people. But to the questions you asked, yes, I think President Trump will have an enormous appeal, frankly, with independents, because we haven't talked about Joe Biden's age. We haven't talked about the fact that I think the majority of the American people question whether he will really be a leader that can finish the second term. Here's the problem I disagree with Eleanor on is there is no bench. They're boxed in. I would call it boxed in. They're boxed in with an extraordinarily unpopular vice president. There's only one thing worse for the Democrats than Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. He's at 37% approval. She's at 31%. Those are dismal numbers for a so-called accomplished president. The path here is, in short order, the way things are going, for not only President Trump to win the nomination, but to President Trump, I think, unify the Republican Party behind him.
All right, before we move on, the House of Representatives, which is dominated by Republicans, have just started an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Democrats say the president has done nothing wrong. Yes, his son has allegedly committed crimes. He has been charged for that. He will go on trial for that. But where's the link with the president? What crime has Joe Biden committed?
Well, there is no crime yet, and you know, this is an inquiry, not an impeachment. This is an inquiry to try to find the evidence here. But here, you know, this is a very simple matter for the American people, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm respecting due process, and I agree with Jonathan Turley's testimony today that the nexus has to be made that has not been made, which is we're referring to as the evidence. However, it is a hard pill to swallow to say that a troubled son with no experience is able to make at least $24 million, that's the most conservative figure, and in a family enterprise with all kinds of emails saying they're making tens and tens of millions of dollars for a person who has a troubled history and has no expertise, his own admission. So therefore, what is he selling? He's selling influence. He's selling what Devin Adams said, a brand. And once you make the nexus through bank accounts and other things that come through an inquiry, yes, I think it can be in very serious trouble.
But up to now, we have not seen a crime.
But we haven't seen a crime, but there isn't an impeachment. There aren't articles of impeachment either. This is an inquiry. The Democrats did the same thing. You know, Leader Ford, Gerald Ford, to go back in history, said the House can call an impeachment anything it wants to call it, but there's a majority, and this is an inquiry.
Atiba, let's turn to something more immediate, something we could see by this weekend, and that is the possibility of a government shutdown by September 30th. That's this Saturday. This is over budget issues again, but it could have real-world impact on people. 4 million federal workers won't see their paychecks. What is the issue or issues that are leading to this?
I think the bigger issues that we have is around policy, which the Republicans, unfortunately, have not offered any. And as a result, or revolves around the budget right now, they haven't offered anything in terms of from the budget. Speaker McCarthy and President Biden did come up with an agreement back in June to stave this off. But everything the Republicans continue to put in place, everything they continue to do in terms of gridlock are things that continue to affect and hurt the elderly, continue to affect the disabled community, disability community, continue to affect poor people and middle-class people. So the Republicans, and this is where going back to the debate, going back to government shutdown, all of these conversations that the Republicans continue to offer is just gridlock. And it's about grinding the government to a stop. It's not about trying to improve the lives of everyday Americans. That's what this government shutdown is about.
Right, Brittany, as we hear, it's workers that are going to be hit by this government shutdown, but what kind of political impact will it have?
Yeah, I mean, I hope this wakes up, the American voters. I think the reality is that unfortunately, like the mega folks in the House, we know are really behind the shutdown, and they're not going to budge unless they get the things they want. And unfortunately, it's pushing folks like McCarthy, who's more concerned, right, with keeping his position than he is about the constituents that he serves. Some of the things that McCarthy had put on the table, I think one of the things he proposed was 70% cut to home heating assistance right ahead of winter months, 80% cut in funding for public schools, kicking 1 million families off of nutrition aid. I mean, and this is all basically just to keep his job. And the reality is it's not going to work. And we know that Gates, at the end of the day, he's not really interested in putting forth any policies that are going to help the American worker. Like you've stated, it's chaos, right? We know at the end of the day McCarthy has no choice here. His hands are tied, and that the MAGA section of the House really has control here, and it's going to cost so many Americans that are already struggling, that are living paycheck to paycheck. We know the numbers are at 61% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. This is not the time for this sort of political chaos.
Okay, I want to get to that minority in a moment, Adolfo, but first I want to go to Eleanor. Eleanor, of course, budget bills are not single bills. They don't just address one piece of expenditure or anything like that. They're composite affairs. People snuck in all kinds of things into those bills. And some Republicans are unhappy about more funding for Ukraine. What's that about?
Well, what that's about is it starts with former President Trump and his affinity for Putin and his declaration now that he would end the war in Ukraine in a day. And the way you do that is by ceding to Putin's demands. And that pro-Putin sentiment has now drifted into the right-wing media stratosphere and into the Republican caucus on Capitol Hill. A majority of Republicans support aid to Ukraine. The minority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, supports aid to Ukraine. Again, this is between 7 and 12 hard right people in the caucus who are putting aid to Ukraine on their wish list. Yeah. I would say that Speaker McCarthy does have a choice. He has a choice to craft a bill that can get Democratic votes. That would trigger his caucus to call for his removal, but his removal would have to get 218 votes on the House floor. Democrats might be willing to prop him up. If not, is one man's job worth putting the entire economy at risk? And we should also point out that the former President Trump is egging on the Republican hardliners. He would like to tank the economy. He would like to create a recession because then he can blame it all on Biden and it would ease his path back to the White House. So there are a lot of forces at play here, and they're minority forces, and we should underscore that repeatedly.
Right, Adolfo, I know you want to respond to all of that, but let me start first with something that Eleanor said, that part of this budget dispute is about Republicans' affinity for President Putin.
Well, of course, that's absolute nonsense. I think Eleanor is now rehearsing for Democratic National Committee spokesperson or something. To refresh everyone's memory here, it was President Trump who bombed a Syrian base, Russian base. It was President Trump who did that. In 2014, under Obama-Biden, when Crimea was seized, no armaments were sent to Ukraine, despite the pleas of Republicans to do so at that time, including private citizen Donald Trump. So this is just nonsense and revisionist history. The think that President Trump wants to tank the economy and ruin the country, Biden's taking care of that on his own. But to the points of the government shutdown, if I could just quickly on this, here's the reality, which I do recognize. The fact of the matter is there are two Republican parties. There is more of an establishment Republican Party, conservative. I'm not suggesting moderate or whatever, it's a conservative party. Then there's a small faction, probably 20, members who really belong to a populist movement with a Republican label. So the Speaker's real majority is less than 218. That's the dilemma. And the other guests are absolutely right. There was a deal cut by the Speaker and President Biden to reduce spending to just the bill to for next year less than $1.5 billion. It was a significant cut in concession by the Biden administration. The Republicans would have had a victory. It's unfortunately they're not taking it. So they're holding the Speaker hostage. In some case, a member or two just out of personal animosity. At the end of the day, this I do agree with Eleanor. The government will be funded with Democratic votes. There is no way Speaker McCarthy can get the votes he needs with just Republican votes to keep the government running.
Right. Brittany, we've just got a few minutes left, and I want to get to something very quickly, and that is, this is another hot button issue, which is all over television screens, and that is what is going on the southern border of the United States. We see pictures of hundreds of people crossing that border. How big an issue is this? Is this a problem for Democrats?
I mean, this has been an ongoing problem for quite some time. And of course, it's an issue for Democrats because it's always framed as a Democratic issue. The Democrats don't take a hard line on immigration. But I always say that this is a much more it's a bigger problem than what it seems like on its face in terms of just building a wall, right? That's not going to fix the issue. I actually think it's the billionaire class and folks like Donald Trump, right, who essentially are destroying economies abroad, right, by essentially extracting labor, extracting the workforce, and destroying those economies abroad. It's causing great chaos. It's leading to more gang violence, and of course, people are trying to sort of seek refuge here and jobs and opportunities here. So I think that again, it's very short-sighted the way that we talk about immigration, and of course, us just building a wall and saying no immigrants welcome is not going to be a tangible solution, nor does it actually map onto the United States values.
Atiba, very quickly, I've only got about 30 seconds. How big an election issue is immigration going to be?
Immigration, I mean, the Republicans are going to make a big issue of it. As you're talking about the border and who's coming in, the government shutdown is also going to impact that because there are going to be 2 million military servicemen and women who are not going to get paid, and there are going to be border patrol that are down there that are protecting the border that are not going to get paid. So all of this is a bigger issue, and it's all wrapped into the gridlock that the Republicans have created.
Democrats have proposed an amendment by Republicans to have them paid on the Senate floor.
We are going to have to leave it there. Thank you to all of you for being with us. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade,